Guys, just a quick question here from Kerik asking about the Fed and Fed policy, saying that for clarity, is it only the voting members' comments that we care about in terms of shifting their usual stance, their policy stance, or any central bank members? So there is a hierarchy, if you want to put it that way, Kerik. When you look at some of these comments, obviously, when you have your chair, your Fed chair, and your vice Fed chair, or looking at other central banks, when you have your governor and your deputy governor, whatever they have to say does normally carry more weight given their position, even though there's obviously voting involved and they don't have the final say and a bigger vote, so to speak. They're just one member. Obviously they do have a lot of sway among their committees, among their central banks. So their comments will always be very, very important for us to gauge. So from a hierarchy point of view, you would consider comments from Fed Chair Powell being more important than somebody that might not be a voter that year. But apart from that, we can't really discount any comments from central bankers as being more important or less important, just because they might be voting or not voting. So if you take a look at the currency research section in the terminal, you'll see the central bank analysis part where you've got the cheat sheets for the ECB, the Bank of England, and the Fed. And if you take a look at the Federal Reserve one, if you scroll down all the way to the bottom, you'll see there's a section there that says non-voting Reserve Bank presidents attend the meetings of the committee, participate in discussions, and contribute to the committee's assessment of the economy and its policy options. So when you look at it from that sense, even though they might not be voters for a particular year, it's not like their views and their opinions doesn't matter to the committee, right? So they're discussing, they're involved in the same discussions, they are contributing to that overall assessment of the economy and the policy options. So they are very much involved in the decision making process, so to speak, even though they might not be a voter for that particular year. And think about it that way, they rotate. So if you take a look at the current setup, we had some very, very important comments last week from members. Let's quickly go down the list. We had some very important comments from members like Esther George. Now, you can see here she's considered as a neutral member and a non-voter for 2021. We also had Bullard, which is considered as a hawk, non-voter for 2021. And then we had somebody like Mester, a neutral member, non-voter 2021. Now, even though they're non-voters this year, meaning that they don't have a vote for the September, November, or December upcoming meetings, when they do have a vote, all three of them are voters for 2022. Now, the reason why that is important is that your composition between members can change what the possible expectation might be for policy going forward. So, for example, we've got Mester saying some pretty hawkish stuff last week. We had Esther George, she also came out saying some pretty hawkish stuff. And then Bullard, obviously, he was a hawk, saying even more hawkish stuff. So from two neutral members, which is Mester and George, both of them are voters in 2022 alongside Bullard, which means that suddenly they shift from a more neutral tone to saying some things that's more hawkish. That's very significant, whether they're voters or non-voters. But the fact that they're going to be voting in a year when the markets will potentially need to price in or price out higher rates for the Fed, that's going to be very important. So just because it is a voter or non-voter, normally you would consider, if it's a policy meeting coming up, let's say we're a week away from a policy decision and we have a non-voter and a voter talking. Obviously, the first thing that'll catch your attention isn't the fact whether they are a voter or a non-voter. It's whether they are a hawk and saying something dovish, or whether they're a dove saying something hawkish, or whether they're neutral and they're saying something dovish or hawkish. So that's always going to be your first reaction point. The second one can be, okay, how far are we away from a meeting? Are they a voter or a non-voter? How important will that be for the overall vote? But again, just because they're not voting doesn't mean that their opinion doesn't matter, doesn't mean that they haven't shared in the discussion and the decision-making process. That's very important to keep in mind. And for that reason, just because somebody might be a voter or not, doesn't mean that their comments aren't important. Voter or non-voter will always be important. Like we said, there's a little bit of a hierarchy because your Fed and your vice Fed chairs, or your governor and your deputy governors, will have more sway, especially from a market's point of view. What your what the leader of the pack has to say does matter, or can matter more. But again, you need to look at it from a composition point of view, and that means that even though your leaders are always going to have more sway and be more important, doesn't mean that what the other members say won't be important to also keep on the radar.